Okay, good day. My name is Peter Mol. I'm an assessor at the Dutch Medicines Evaluation Board, a member of the European Medicines Agency Scientific Advice Working Party, and a professor of regulatory science in the University of Groningen. And I will be talking about you on the regulatory perspective from a European regulatory perspective on the early onset of type 1 diabetes. My views currently, but no other conflicts of interest. And so I would like to talk to you a little bit about diabetes guideline that we have at the EMA. Then I'll move a little bit into how we assess drugs with a focus on the endpoints, which I think is really relevant here in this situation, talking about C-peptide. And I will give you a couple of the tools that we offer in support of drug development, which is scientific advice and the qualification of novel methodologies. I will then touch briefly on what are patient-relevant outcomes and how PROs and patient preferences are perceived in the regulatory context and can help shape drug development. Finally, I will give you something on conditional approvals and PRIME in the European context as another support tool, and then I'll move on to my conclusions. So clearly, type 1 diabetes is an important disease. It is worldwide. It is especially in Europe, where there is a very high incidence. And if you look on this map, presented by Patterson and colleagues, you can see that the incidence is around 25 per 100,000 population, and Europe is coloring very dark on this map. Interestingly, the level of care and for these patients is very high, and mortality, especially in the young, identified patient population, is not increased compared to the general population, and that is, I think, an important if you compare that to other parts of the world. So what have we seen as regulators around type 1 diabetes? Well, clearly lots of insulins have been approved over time and currently are still being improved, and we'll see many of those. Recently, two SGLT2 inhibitors have been approved also for additional use in patients with type 1 diabetes. But if we are going to talk about the delay in onset and prevention of type 1 diabetes, or especially today about preservation of beta cell function in patients with type 1 diabetes, our guideline is only touching this very lightly. There are 2 pages assigned to that, and we don't have that much experience in this setting of end-stage insulitis, where there is still 10 to 20% of functioning beta cells, and where the suggestion at least is that preserving some of this insulin secretory capacity will have an impact on the further progression of the disease in the patients. But it's important that you also start early with treatment. So what does this guideline further say? Well, what do we want to have demonstrated? Clearly, C-peptide is an important aspect to measure that level of functioning beta cells. Can do that in form of the area under the curve or the exposure still of C-peptide, but also maybe defined as a proportion of patients that have C-peptide levels above a clinically meaningful threshold. But not alone. We really think that there should be a co-primary endpoint, and that should be powered for also success on either HbA1c, maybe on other clinical aspects such as the frequency of hypoglycemic episodes, patients not requiring any insulin or with a relevant reduction in insulin use, but the latter is a bit of a difficult setting, how much insulin reduction is then meaningful. And then clearly this needs to be supported by secondary endpoints. All of the above aspects should be taken along when presenting this, that are not at primary endpoints, but also fasting and postprandial glucose concentration. 24 hours glucose profiles are very relevant. Total insulin daily use and occurrence of ketoacidosis. We also expect that a primary endpoint is measured around a year, and that the benefits should be those sustained for a minimum of 2 years. So this really requires longer term studies. And we expect that highly sensitive assays for C-peptide are being used, And if we are going to move into the young patients, the pediatric population, we expect that you start in the adults, adolescents, and then lower, younger populations. But clearly, any effect should be, in terms of size and duration, be balanced against the risks of the intervention in often young people. And the special concern is with the immunosuppressants that we have mostly seen in this setting on this general immune response that is maybe important in adolescents and young children especially, but also the long-term safety follow-up. Life-threatening infections, malignancies are a point of concern. So how do European regulators work? We are 27 countries collaborating, all managed through the EMA, European Medicines Agency office. And the important committee here is the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, where medicines are approved. And you will have to pass through before your product is being marketed. And what we then do as regulators, well, this is a picture from ICH guidance. And basically all the dots on the screen are studies, and they are performed across the phases of development, from pharmacology to exploratory phase 2 and confirmatory phase 3 studies, and perhaps some post-marketing studies as well. And what we do is look at all these studies in very particular detail. And the idea is that the objectives of the study can be met by the design and the way the data are being analyzed. And that is, I'm telling you this because internal validity of these trials also is very important. And we look at, obviously, the patient selection, the comparator in the study, statistical analyses and follow-up duration. But we also have always a very hefty discussion on what are the endpoints, and it's a very precise look. A dossier like this lipid-lowering agent, a monoclonal antibody aimed at targeted PCSK9, really convincingly showed in various study setups, monotherapy, combination therapies in heterozygous FH populations, all very clear change in LDL levels, also compared to placebo or also to an active control. Similarly, actually, for the pandemic, the Pfizer vaccine or the BioNTech vaccine showed already early on an effect on neutralizing antibodies in different age ranges, but clearly different from the gray bars that indicate the antibodies in patients who were treated with placebo. So you see a big effect, but clearly this is difficult to interpret as you don't know what is the correlative protection of what level of antibodies do you need to see to have sufficient efficacy. For LDLC, actually the same. It's a surrogate for cardiovascular outcomes, but are they being demonstrated? And the main problem is then that obviously you can have an effect on a biomarker, C-peptide, LDL, neutralizing antibodies, but there could be off-target effects that may have an impact on the endpoint where you are clinical endpoint which you are later looking on. And we have had numerous examples where despite a good effect on the targeted endpoint, there were adverse effects or adverse outcomes overall in the study design. CETP inhibitor, other drugs in the setting of hypertension or chronic kidney disease, where all the right effects were seen. Blood pressure, albuminuria decreased, but increase in cardiovascular outcomes was nevertheless observed. LDLC, we trust a lot more. We see that as a surrogate endpoint. For other lipids, it is though more debatable, and some have argued also that we should, as regulators, put only drugs on the market once we have all these data, because otherwise we might have to take drugs off the market which could have harmed patients. In the end, it is always this simple setting. We can go on, follow the blue line, and avoid any drug-related harm by increasing the knowledge that we have about the drug. But at some point, we haven't reached an optimum, and the benefit to public health diminishes because we are delaying market approval for so long. So if companies have a strategy, and that might be a little different than they intent or than the common path. It is very important, it's vital actually, that we they talk to us as regulators, and we try to be a bit more the enabler there than the gatekeeper, where we try to think along what are good endpoints, for instance, what are other aspects. And we do that in the scientific advice working party at the EMA, or for instance in prime designated products, we give additional support. I'll come back to that. So the questions that we answer or address in the scientific advice procedures are, for instance, indeed, can C-peptide be used as a primary endpoint? Or other questions is 40% of eGFR acceptable as a composite renal endpoint? Can we use a seamless adaptive design study? Are the intercurrent events handled appropriately, etc., etc.? If a company or a consortium seeks advice on a novel methodology, a novel PRO, a patient-reported outcome, or a statistical method, maybe to analyze data or to do modeling, or has a biomarker that they want to use across a wider range, so not one product, but across a wider range of procedures, we have this qualification of methodology procedure where there's an in-depth discussion on different components. And what we do then is that we talk with a consortium, a company, on, for instance, C-peptide. What is the rationale for use? Well, it measures beta cell function, and it could be used for enrichment or as a surrogate endpoint. It needs data. These data would be either retrospective validation and epidemiological data, post-hoc trial evaluation, but we also would expect something in a prospective setting against clinical data if you would want to validate this in the setting of a surrogate endpoint. And other aspects come also to bear in that discussion. So the same is on the right-hand side for continuous glucose monitoring, for instance, as an outcome. And similarly, kind of considerations are there which need to be made or discussed before we could approve something like this. Coming to what is now relevant to the patient, I think it's really important that ICH has also, the International Conference on Harmonization, has written this reflection paper to talk about patient-focused drug development, where PROs and patient preferences are specifically addressed. PROs are a well-known concept, I would say. Part of those are the quality of life, so the general questions about how a patient feels about his life, but also it can be health-related HRQL that is more focused at the disease. And we think also in the range of type 1 diabetes, especially around hypoglycemic episodes, you could also want to obtain patient-relevant information there, patient-relevant outcomes. Again, there needs to be a validation procedure. And I think it can be well informed what could be good endpoints by also using patient preferences. These preferences and perspectives on what are the most important drug effects could be different to different populations. And here is a discrete choice experiment that we performed in the Netherlands and later repeated also in Turkey, where it's indicated that patients are really especially driven by the influence and risk of cardiovascular disease, and that other aspects contribute to a smaller amount to what patients really seek in a drug. So how can we then as regulators be more enabling in support and development of new products and also new endpoints by either looking at conditional approvals where there's a data, well, an initial approval based on more limited data and further data iterative development after approval. Also, we can give more dedicated advice and help a company in developing its product and more intensively meeting them. And I will talk a little bit about both longer. The conditional approval is will give you a marketing authorization that is valid for 1 year. It must be and is accompanied by specific obligations that need to be, which are the conditions for the approval. It can be in various settings, and in the setting of type 1 diabetes or newly onset type 1 diabetes, it's a seriously debilitating disease. We would agree to that. Could also be for life-threatening disease or diseases to be used in emergency situations, orphan products. But it needs to fulfill a number of criteria. There should be a positive benefit-risk balance be possible to make on the data that is submitted already at the initial stage. If that is not possible at all, if it's a very ultra-rare disease and you cannot get the comprehensive clinical data, then we talk about exceptional circumstances. I think we're not in that setting in the type 1 diabetes. But what is an important consideration, and there it becomes more tricky, is the benefit to public health of immediate availability on the market should outweigh the risk that is inherent by the fact that additional data are still needed. And here it becomes critical because in the view of the European regulator, insulin therapy is a very good treatment option. Yes, it has its adverse effects, but we know them very well. And patients can live for very long with insulin therapy. And in the European context, technical solutions are being widely available to patients to facilitate also the use and administration of insulin and manage risk, or patients use CGM, for instance. So that is really something where it becomes difficult to convince regulators perhaps to say a conditional approval will absolutely be needed for any therapy in this newly onset type 1 diabetes. If we don't have products that are very promising, there is something like the PRIME scheme. It's a bit like the breakthrough designation at the US or the Japanese Sakigake program. But in areas of unmet need, there could, and where there are still lots of regulatory challenges, for instance, an endpoint that is not very clear on what we feel about it, could be a method to facilitate early dialogue. And what we do is we have more interactions with the company. Ideally, we would help to strengthen and optimize the development and enable also an accelerated assessment when the data are finally ready to be submitted for marketing approval. And we do that only for drugs that have a high public health need. And for instance, teplizumab has gotten such a designation for the setting of type 1 diabetes in at-risk individuals, so to prevent or delay the onset. So it's different from where we're talking today, but that has gotten. So finally, my conclusion would be type 1 diabetes is really an important disease in European context. We have a well-known therapy, the insulin treatment. We have a little bit of SGLT2s also, but the experience for delay of onset and preservation of beta cell function is limited. We think C-peptide is an interesting biomarker, but it needs to be accompanied by clinical endpoints or very well-known PD markers like HbA1c. And these endpoints need to outweigh harms. And as I discussed, this aspect of the immediate availability outweighing risk of the fact that we don't have complete data will make conditional approval very harder to justify in this setting because of the availability of the insulins. Nevertheless, if you have promising products in this setting, I think early regulatory support through PRIME and qualification procedures, for instance, the C-peptide, are absolutely available and routes I would recommend you to seek. And finally, I think in the European context, it's also important to really think about what health technology agencies and payers are willing to pay or want to see before a drug is going to be marketed. So I think that is what I wanted to present to you now. And I'm happy to discuss further in the next day or 2 days about C-peptide. Thank you very much.